Once upon a time, in a land not so very far away, there lived a little girl. And although this little girl's parents hadn't brought her up very religiously at all, she was quite determined that she was the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, which was somewhat strange for any 6-year-old. She'd wear a little beard and would go around in sandals blessing stuff. She could be forever found walking amongst the homeless and the poor, consoling the drunks and the drug addicts, and generally consorting with the type of person her mommy and daddy didn't deem suitable for any 6-year-old to be consorting with. Each time they'd drag her home, she'd stamp and scream and throw her dollies about. And when her parents would counter that, Jesus would never stamp and scream and throw his dollies about. She'd reply, "Well, that was the old Jesus. Get it?" Well, one day the little girl slipped away yet again. And for 2 horrifying days her parents could find neither hide nor hair of her, until they received a phone call from a priest they didn't know, saying, "You better come down to the church. Your daughter's here giving us a lot of shit." It was cute at first, but now it's really getting irritating. Well, their parents didn't care about all that. They were just relieved she was alive and well. And they sped downtown to pick her up. But in their haste, they careened into an oncoming meat truck, were beheaded, and died. The little girl was informed of the news. She cried one single tear and not a single tear more, as she thought Jesus would have done if he'd lost his parents in a vehicular beheading. And she was shipped off by the state to live in a forest with some abusive foster parents, who hadn't mentioned they were abusive on the forms, who hated religion, who hated Jesus, who hated anybody, and in fact who didn't hate anybody, and who, as would follow, hated the little girl. She bore their hate with a happy heart and forgave them, but this didn't seem to work. When she insisted on attending church of a Sunday, they took her sandals away, forcing her to walk there barefoot and alone over craggy roads of broken glass. Yet when she'd get there, she'd kneel for hours begging to her Father in heaven to forgive them, only to be told off for bleeding all over the church. She received a beating for arriving home late, though no time had been set for her arrival. She received a beating for sharing her food with the poor kids at school. She received a beating for cheering up the ugly kids. She received a beating for wandering around looking for lepers. Her life was a constant torture. But she bore it with a smile, and it all only made her stronger. Until this one day when she came across a blind man begging by the roadside. She mixed a little of her spittle in the dust and rubbed it all over his eyes. He reported her to rubbing dust and spittle in his eyes, and when her parents got her back from the police station, they said to her, "Do you still want to be like Jesus?" And she said, "Finally, you fucking get it." And they stared at her a while, and then it began. Her foster mother embedded in her daughter's head a crown of thorns made of barbed wire, because she was too lazy to make a proper crown of thorns, while her father whipped her with a cat o' nine tails. After an hour or so of this, they asked her, when she regained consciousness, "Do you still want to be like Jesus?" She swallowed her tears, and she said, "Yes, I do." And they made her carry a heavy wooden cross around the sitting room 100 times until her legs buckled and her shins broke, and all she could do was stare at her legs going the wrong way. And they said to her, "Do you still want to be like Jesus?" And she almost got sick a second, but she swallowed it so she wouldn't look weak. She stared at them in the eye and said, "Yes, I do." And they nailed her hands to the cross, and they bent her legs back around the right way and nailed her feet to the cross. And they stood the cross up against the back wall and left her there while they watched television. And when all the good television programs were over, they turned it off and they sharpened a spear. And they said to her, "Do you still want to be like Jesus?" She swallowed her tears. She took a deep breath and she said, "No, I don't. I fucking am Jesus." And her parents stuck the spear in her side and they left her there to die, and they went to bed. And in the morning they were quite surprised that she still wasn't dead. So they took her off the cross and buried her alive in a little coffin with only enough breathing holes to breathe for just 3 days. And the last voices she heard were her foster parents calling out, "Well, if you're Jesus, Then you'll rise again in 3 days, won't you?" She smiled for a moment, and she thought about it, and she whispered, "Exactly. Exactly." And she waited, and she waited, and she waited. 3 days later, a man out walking the woods stumbled over a small, freshly dug grave. But as the man was quite blind, he carried on by, sadly not hearing a horrible scratching of bone upon wood a little way behind him, that ever so slowly faded away and was lost forever in the black gloom of the empty forest.